it comes to the point where it needs to be written down and I go, I don't have anything. Hello everyone, and welcome back to my channel, Just Another Struggling Writer, the beleaguered author's one-stop shop for commiseration and hopefully inspiration. My name is Carrie Scher, and I am just another struggling writer. And today, the struggling part is especially prescient. As you know, we just wrapped up Camp NaNoWriMo, and my goal at the time was 30,000 words, and unfortunately, that just didn't happen. I reached about 9,000 words, and that was it. I didn't even attempt to write for like almost the entire last week of the month, and I had many days in between where I didn't even open my notebook. I didn't even think about writing. I allowed other interests to distract me. And that has brought me back to thinking something that I've been thinking for a while, in that I am not taking writing as seriously as I profess. And if I ever want to become a writer, which I very much do, I have got to change something in my routine, or change something in my mindset, or change something in the way that I actually approach writing, or all of the above and more, in order to actually get a book finished. And it is with that in mind that I have decided to wipe my slate clean. And by that I mean do a complete reset on all of the projects that have been sitting out in limbo, things that have been started and abandoned, things that I have thought were cool and then changed, or things that I say I'm going to be writing and then I don't, including this project that I was just working on in April. What I would like to do is document the process of starting and completing a novel by someone who is really struggling to write and complete a novel. And I mean the entire process from day one till the end. And for me, that includes the planning stages, because I am a strident planner. I do not do well with pantsing. In fact, I think that's part of the reason I have been struggling so much in the last couple of years, because I have sort of not done my due diligence on my planning stages, and that has led me to fizzle out when I run out of ideas. So today is day one, the start of a new writing vlog series chronicling my journey to actually finish writing a fucking novel. So what do we do on day one? I guess I should probably start by picking a project. I have several ideas in the tank. You may recall that I did a to be written list several months back, and there are quite a lot of ideas on that list to choose from. But I think I would prefer to start with the 3 that are most developed. And unfortunately, that means looking back at the 3 most recent projects that I started and then abandoned. These 3 projects all have something in common. I did not do any extensive planning before I started drafting, and I fizzled out on writing them around 25,000 words. The first of these projects is a portal fantasy with some romance elements, with the working title Trials of the Windsong Goddess. It is the project I was working on in April, and it was the project I was working on last year before NaNoWriMo. The draw of this particular project is that it has been calling to me of late. I spent pretty much all of March obsessing over it. Unfortunately, that didn't turn into actionable planning or outlines, which is why I struggled so much to actually write it in April. My second project that I could pick up is a urban fantasy that centers on a secret government magic agency. That working title is Seekers of Empyrean. What draws me to this particular idea is that it is kind of inspired by Monster of the Week style TV shows. The books are, in my mind, intended to be shorter, snappier, episodic, and building up to a longer series of books. I did start writing this in November for NaNoWriMo and got again to about 25,000 words. The main character is spunky and fun, and I really love writing in her voice. The third project I could do is a kind of standard adventure fantasy with a sapphic romance. This particular project has appeal because it is intended to be either a standalone or at best a duology, and wouldn't require a whole lot of additional forethought and planning. Again, I started writing this last year, or maybe the year before, and got to about 25,000 words. And I had some really interesting ideas for the magic system that just needs a little bit more development. This one has the tentative title, Daughters of Necessity. There are other projects I could choose from, of course, but these three feel like the most ready to be written. Unfortunately, they're not actually ready to be written at all, which is part of the problem. So, what do I choose? That is my day one conundrum. All three have merit. All three have at least 25,000 words of a zero draft that I can lean on, although I would really like to scrap those in favor of something fresh. For all three, I have envisioned a beginning and an end, but the middles are complete mysteries. Seekers of Empyrean probably feels like it has the most in terms of plot already ready to go, and I could fill out the middle portions fairly easily. The downside is that it has one of the more complex magic systems I've ever tried to create, and it would take a little bit of extra planning to get all the mechanics worked out. I do feel like I made some headway in my most recent attempt at a draft, though. On the other hand, Daughters of Necessity is fairly well developed in my mind, and I have some interesting ideas for the magic system, and I don't imagine it would be as difficult to flesh out the beats of the adventure itself, which leaves the project I am most drawn to, and unfortunately, I have absolutely no idea what to do with the middle of the story. This has been something I've been puzzling over for at least a year, and it hasn't gotten any clearer. I know I want romance elements. I know I want an invading force that our heroes are fighting against. I know I want the main character to be torn between these two worlds, but the actual plot points are refusing to illuminate themselves to me, and I have the beginning and the end and no idea of how to connect the two. So just talking that out, it seems like the portal fantasy, the one I am most drawn to and the most attracted to right now, Trials of the Windsong Goddess, should probably fall to the bottom of this list, which leaves Seekers of Empyrean and Daughters of Necessity. Pros of Seekers of Empyrean: again, shorter length, so in theory easier to draft. A fun main character who I enjoyed developing the voice of. A plot that, while not completely fleshed out, I have some main beats already figured out. And just a really fun concept. Secret government magic agency, cults, a woman pulled into this mess in exchange for a job which she desperately needs. I think that's really fun. The cons are that I have tried writing this before and haven't felt drawn to it. The magic system is going to need a lot of finessing. It is based on physical movement, like placing your bodies in certain ways in order to cast the spells. Instead of like speaking a spell or using magical components, it is all about physically moving your body. As a not very physical person myself, who has never studied any sort of martial art on which you would think this would be based, it has been tough, but I made some headway. That's the biggest drawback. Daughters of Necessity, I have the pros are I have the most distance from it because I haven't tried to write it in more than a year. So I have the freshest, I have the most distance. So anything that I come up with now would be with enough distance and mental space to be able to start fresh. I also like some of the magical concepts that I have come up with and the two main characters and their dynamic. I also am setting this in a world wherein I could write other stories in this world but not have them be connected to this particular plot. In fact, I already have an idea for one. I don't know if it was on that list that I talked about earlier, but that one is like a gender-swapped mummy adventure. Anyway, I'll get back to that later. The cons are funnily enough, the distance. I don't feel drawn to it. I don't feel connected to it. I feel sort of bored with the idea, probably because it's been sitting in my headspace for so long and I haven't developed anything new, so there's nothing exciting about it. And I am skeptical of my ability to write an adventure. So where my rankings stand now for what I should write, for what I should develop first, for this vlog, for my first completed draft in like 5 years. Number 1 feels like Seekers of Empyrean is probably the closest. Number 2, Daughters of Necessity. And number 3, Trials of the Windsong Goddess. So what I think I'm going to do today for day 1 is sleep on it. I am the kind of person where that actually does help me. It helps me disengage from the overthinking and the analysis paralysis, and I usually wake up with just a gut feeling. So I think I'm going to go ahead and sleep on it. I've listed out some pros and cons for each. Now I just need that to percolate in my subconscious, and I will theoretically come up with an answer. If I don't have one by tomorrow, then I'll sit down and do a more thorough analysis of each project. But that is going to be it for day 1. So I'm going to do exactly what I just said. I'm going to sleep on it, and I will check back in with you guys tomorrow and hopefully have something else to say. Hey y'all, it is now day 2 of this experiment. And I slept on my decision over what project to make the focus of this vlog and this little experiment. And when I woke up this morning, I had yet to make a decision. I didn't feel really strongly about any of the 3 projects. And really, I spent pretty much all day thinking really deeply about it and dwelling on it. And I think, gosh, what makes the most sense is to go back to my portal fantasy. And on paper and logically, it makes the most sense to me, but for some reason, I just don't feel very excited about it. And as I was thinking about it today, I think part of the reason I'm not excited about it is because, truthfully, I'm not really excited about writing at all right now. I feel kind of like a failure because I have had so many false starts, and I've made so many promises to myself, and I'm just sort of embarrassed about how my writing has gone over the last 2 or 3 years. And I think part of my reticence to return to this to this urban fantasy is because I have started it twice and not accomplished a complete draft either time. And I just feel like, is it beating a dead horse at this point? But the same could also be said for either of these other 2 projects. And I know I don't have any other ideas that are ready to be developed and written. So it has to be one of these 3 if I want to start now, which I do. And so I thought, I can't let that embarrassment and that shame almost, and just the worn down feeling I have prevent me from continuing to try. So like I said, I dwelt really, really deeply on it today, and I think I'm going to go ahead and tackle that urban fantasy one last time. And the reasons I think this is the right project for this moment is the same that I mentioned yesterday. It's meant to be shorter and snappier. The main character has a really fun voice that I did really enjoy writing in. And the magic system, while it needs development, I at least have a kind of core idea to build from. And I don't have to do the extra labor of building an entire custom world around it. It's really just the secret government agency, kind of like that whole part, and the magic itself. And I think I can work with that. I think that is low impact enough. I'm not gonna get so bogged down in world building before I start to write that it's going to feel like a waste of time. That being said, there are some preparatory steps I need to take before I even begin the outlining process. The 2 main things that need to be worked on are, again, the magic system. I've got a pretty solid core idea, like I mentioned, the physical movements and, moving your body to channel magic. That's kind of the basis. So it's really just figuring out what types of movements and all of that, just some finer details, so that when I actually, get into the draft, everything will make sense and have its own internal logic. That's really important for me. This is going to sound so bad, but I actually hate drafting. Probably it's my least favorite part of writing. I like the planning process. I love outlining, and I really like revision, editing, and all of that. But the actual draft is the most difficult part for me, which I think goes back to why this has been so hard, because like I can't make it. I haven't been doing the part that I really like, the planning and the outlining, and I'm just jumping straight into the part that I feel miserable about, and then so there's no enjoyment to bolster me through anyway, which is again why we're here. We're gonna rediscover the joy together, hopefully, ideally. So anyway, the magic system, develop that, give itself its own internal logic. The second thing I need to develop are the cast of characters, but more specifically, the hierarchy of this secret government agency and like the world building of that particular little pocket, how it works, you know, the different like divisions and the people we will see populate it, and, you know, just like the bureaucracy of it. Again, so that it already feels like a functioning, existing, living, breathing entity without, so when I get into the draft, I don't have to be making up those things as I go and slowing down my process. So those are going to be my next steps. I've spent an entire day thinking about what I'm going to write, and now I'm actually going to start getting into the details. If this were a brand new idea, I would spend time, you know, just asking myself questions and playing the what if game. I don't need to do all that. I've got a pretty good idea of, again, the very beginning, the first, I would say 25%, and the climax and the ending. Already pretty solid in my head. It's just the beats in the between and getting to that end point. So I'm going to spend probably a little bit of time, definitely the rest of the week, maybe even longer than that, spend that seriously, very seriously thinking about the magic and actually like writing out the magic system and developing, like I said, that internal logic. And then the secret government agency, the characters that populate it. I may even do some character sheets. I actually really hate character sheets because I just have a hard time like adapting them for the different fantasy worlds that I'm writing. You know, you go to like these generic character worksheets and it's like, what kind of music do they like? And it's just like, or, you know, anyway, it's just silly contemporary things that don't really always apply. And I also just don't think that they're very helpful. Some of that stuff I think comes out in the draft, and you don't really need it. But I think some basic character worksheets, some really, really basic ones for like the peripheral characters that we will see on the page. And again, just developing the system that they're all working in so that it doesn't feel like I just made it up as I went along. Which, not knocking people who do that. Works great for them. It does not at all work for me. That's where I'm at. I've made my decision, and now it's actually time to get into the creative stuff. Working hard on developing the background, the world that, you know, this story will be told in. I don't know how long it's going to take me. I've historically not been great at developing magic systems because I feel like I get really bogged down in the weeds, and then I lose momentum and I lose enthusiasm, and then I go, well, I'll just make it up later. And then I jump into, you know, drafting, and then it comes to the point where it needs to be written down, and I go, I don't have anything. So it's going to be really important for me to stay on topic and actually work out what needs to be worked out. I think that'll ultimately help the drafting process go a lot smoother. So that's what I'm going to do. I'll work on it a little bit tonight, just, you know, jotting down some ideas. I've got this trusty summertime notebook that I'm going to be working in. I love notebooks, and unlike many of my writing contemporaries, I actually use them. And that's what I'll be using this guy for, is to just jot down some notes tonight And then I will check in with you guys tomorrow just to, see how my progress has gone. And we'll just go from there. We will just go on this journey together. Truly, this is going to be a journey from absolute start, from ground zero, theoretically, all the way until the end and beyond. Because I do love me some revision. So, I will see you guys tomorrow. Hello, everyone. It is now Monday night. And I did not update you at all over the weekend because I was spending time with my partner. So my partner bought me Baldur's Gate 3 so we could play it together. So that being said, I have been working on my magic system a little bit. I think when I last left you guys, we were talking about developing the magic system and developing the secret government agency. And there's one more thing I realized over the weekend that I need to think about really deeply, and that is what to call magic users in this world, because I'm definitely not fucking calling them wizards or witches. And mages just feels too like secondary world terminology. But I also can't think of anything else that would like pack the same punch as you're a wizard, Harry, or something of that nature. So I'm trying to think of, in this secret government agency where everyone theoretically is a magic user, what is the term they have for themselves? Like X-Men has the mutants or whatever, something like that, something that they would call each other or themselves, or something that the government would call magic users. So I have to think of that. But I have been doing some work on my magic system, and so my starting point for my magic system was deciding A, what can it do, and B, and more importantly, what can it not do? Because magic has to have limits. If magic does not have limits, then you're telling a story so wildly out of proportion to the real world, which this is supposed to be set in, that it becomes comical. Like there's no stakes because your character can read minds, or there's no anyway. So or you could just kill with a thought, or you can do this, or you can do that. So there has to be limits, of course. So I've come up with some ideas. I wrote out in my handy dandy notebook. I wrote out what can it do, what can it not do, and then some notes. And I'm still sort of working through that. A big thing that I got hung up on, and this is part of the reason why I didn't update over the weekends, because I wanted to answer this question first, is can magic in this world manipulate a person? So I have that it can create elements, it can summon elements like a fireball and like wind, and it can create illusions and that sort of thing. But I had to answer the question for myself. Could you kill another person with just magic? Or could you brainwash them, or like control their bodies or their minds? Could you, maybe because I'm playing Baldur's Gate so much, but like, could you charm them? Could you convince them that you're not lying? Could you read their minds? So that's something that I have been trying to answer, because I feel like saying no would really limit the scope of what I can do with this system and this world and this story, because I do want it to be a very long story. I have 9 books planned in this series, but it also opens up the door for like a whole other kettle of fish that I wasn't sure I was prepared to answer. So these are the things that like I'm sure pantsers have no problem like doing, because they'll like, oh, I'll just change it later, or I'll just fix it while I'm drafting. But these are the sorts of things that I have to know before I start. So because I want everything to be consistent and efficient and logical across the board. I think I've decided that only through the use of powerful magical artifacts can manipulation of like the body or another person be possible, or like really cunning use of illusions. I think that's where I'm leaning. So that's what I've been working on since Friday. And I'm probably going to be working on this a little bit more thoroughly. I'm going to finish this list. My plan is to finish this list of what it can and can't do, and then start working on the actual like mechanics of it. Again, it's based on movement in the body. So thinking about like one of the ideas that I have is for the 4 like basic elements that you think of: fire, water, earth, and wind. You have to be physically facing one point of the compass while you're doing your motions in order to, summon that type of element. That's something I'm thinking about. And then just other ways, like what body movements mean what and how, like, it's all going to be very complicated. And of course, I don't have to think of every single possible combination, but I would like to get some of the basic ones down. So again, that when I get into the draft, it's all logical and it makes sense and it's consistent with itself. And that's kind of where I'm at. That big question about what to call magic users, and then the big question of what can magic do and not do, has been what has been on my mind since Friday. So I'm going to continue working on this list. I also have some notes about how magical artifacts are created. Can you teleport? If you can't manipulate the body, can you manipulate your own body at least? Like, can you fly? Or is that something more like Iron Man where you're like, it's thrust and it's the air that you're manipulating, not your body? So those are the kinds of things that I'm thinking about more deeply and will continue to develop. So that is my update for Monday. It's a slow going process, but I think in the long run, as long as I'm thinking about it every day and working on it every day, I think I can be pretty happy with it. And I don't want to bog myself down in this process forever, of course, but answering these really fundamental questions early is only going to save myself time in the long run. So I don't think it is time wasted to be thinking deeply about these things and answering questions for myself that I know for a fact will come up later. So that's where I am. I will check in with you guys tomorrow and I'll see you then. Hey y'all, it is now Wednesday night, the last day of this very first writing vlog. And I am pleased to say I made a lot of progress today. I spent most of the day thinking about the magic system and that list I talked about of what it can do and more importantly what it can't do. And I really filled it out. Like up until today, I had just a couple of items on it and I was having a lot of trouble just kind of thinking about the different kinds of magic. And the big question I had was whether or not the magic in this world can affect other people. Can it be used to read other people's minds or control their thoughts or make them ill or make them do things they didn't want to do? Those kinds of things. And I came to a decision that it can't. And from there, it was just a matter of sorting into categories the different kinds of magic and whether or not it makes sense in this world for it to be feasible. So I'm pretty much done with that part. I have one last question that I need to figure out if it's a yes or a no, and I think I'm gonna sleep on it, but I am pretty much done with that part, which means starting tomorrow I'm gonna start thinking more deeply about the actual mechanics of it, the different movements and all of that, and how summoning the magic is going to work. But what I think I want to tackle next is the secret government agency and like the structure of it and what it does exactly, what it's legally allowed to do, what it's required to do, what the goal is, what the structure is, and things like that. So I think I'm gonna start thinking more deeply about that before I get more into the nitty-gritty mechanics of how the magic is actually summoned, because that feels like more granular than I am prepared to think right now. But yeah, it was a really productive day, and there were so many like thoughts and questions that I never would have thought about if I hadn't actually sat down and took the time to think about things like, is it possible to teleport? Is it possible to spy on people via magic, scrying? Is it possible to fly? Is it possible to affect gravity? Things like that. Things like I never would have thought about unless it came up in the draft. But now I am forcing myself to think about it, and that way, if it comes up and I'm in the middle of a draft, I know exactly already what the limitations are. And more to the point, my main character, if she has those questions, if it comes up, if it's something that would naturally occur to her to ask, I already have that answer and I don't have to worry about the logic being inconsistent. So it was really, really productive day. So in the grand scheme of this last week, what I have done is I have decided on a project to actually work on for this vlog series. And I have spent a lot of time thinking about my magic system and actually come up with a lot of answers about how it works and what is possible. And in doing so, I've even come up with ideas for future installments of this series. I'm sure I've mentioned it before, but this particular idea, the whole idea behind it is to be like kind of a shorter book in a longer series, you know, with a sort of monster of the week sort of flavor. And so the fact that I'm coming up with ideas, like I had one idea today where I was like, I don't know that it would make sense for this to be in the first book, but it feels like it should be happen early in the grand scheme of the story, so maybe like a second or third book. And so those are the kinds of things that, you know, I always get really strong ideas when I'm in the weeds of something. They don't just naturally occur to me very often. And so this whole experiment with sitting down and dedicating a lot of time to actually thinking through the mechanics of things is also generating ideas, and that is important too. So ultimately, it's, even though it feels like it took a long time to come up with very few like with very little actual movement forward, it really did help me a lot. So that wraps up this very first writing vlog for my urban fantasy tentatively titled Seekers of Empyrean. I hope you enjoyed watching me walk through this process. It's been really eye-opening for me, and I look forward to continuing it next week. Like I said, I'm going to be focusing a little bit on the structure, the command structure, and like the actual like ins and outs and the inner workings of this secret government agency, and maybe tackle some character worksheets. But I will leave that for next week. But for now, I will just say thank you so much for watching. I have all my information in the description below, including my Ko-Fi link if you're interested in supporting me in that way. Otherwise, a like and subscribe would never go amiss, and I will see you in my next video.